At its peak in 1920, the British Empire controlled 35.5 million square kilometres, nearly a quarter of Earth's land surface, and ruled over 412 million people, 23% of the global population. The sun never set on British territory because Britain had conquered so much of the planet that it was always daytime somewhere in the empire. But here's what they don't tell you. Britain didn't build the largest empire in history through trade and diplomacy. They built it through violence, extraction and exploitation on a scale that reshaped continents, destroyed civilizations and created famines that killed tens of millions. The modern world, its borders, its conflicts, its inequalities, was designed in London by men who never set foot in the places they carved up. This is the British Empire they don't teach in schools. This is the empire of rebellions crushed, wealth stolen, and legacies that still bleed. Let's begin. Number 1. The British Empire started with piracy, not trade. Elizabeth I gave letters of marque to privateers like Francis Drake, legal permission to rob Spanish ships and share the loot with the Crown. Drake circumnavigated the globe, raided Spanish colonies, and returned with enough stolen gold to pay off England's national debt. The Queen knighted him. Piracy became policy. Number 2. The East India Company wasn't a business, it was a private army that conquered India. Founded in 1600, the company raised its own military, waged wars, collected taxes, and ruled 20% of global GDP at its peak. It had twice as many soldiers as the British Army. A corporation became an empire. Shareholders got dividends from colonialism. Number 3. Britain didn't discover most of the places it colonized. It invaded lands already inhabited by millions. India had 100 million people when the East India Company arrived. Australia had 750,000 indigenous people. Africa had complex kingdoms and trade networks. Britain didn't find empty lands. It emptied inhabited ones. Number 4. The British Empire was funded by slavery. Between 1640 and 1807, British ships transported 3.1 million enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, more than any other nation. Sugar, tobacco and cotton plantations in the Caribbean and Americas generated enormous wealth. Britain got rich selling human beings. Number 5. When slavery was abolished in 1833, the British government paid £20 million in compensation, not to the enslaved people, but to the slaveholders. That's £17 billion in today's money. British taxpayers finished paying off the debt in 2015. You were paying for slavery until 8 years ago. Number 6. The enslaved people received nothing. 4 million people were freed without land, money or reparations. Their former owners got wealthy, the enslaved got freedom and poverty. Justice was never part of the deal. Number 7. Britain didn't abolish slavery out of morality. Economics forced their hand. The Haitian Revolution proved enslaved people could win their freedom through violence. Slave revolts were becoming expensive. Wage labour in colonies became cheaper than maintaining slavery. Abolition was pragmatic, not principled. Number 8. After abolition, Britain didn't stop exploiting labour, it invented indentured servitude. Between 1834 and 1920, Britain transported 2 million Indians and Chinese to work plantations in the Caribbean, Africa and Southeast Asia under contracts that were slavery in all but name. Low pay, brutal conditions, no way home. Slavery with paperwork. Number 9. The Opium Wars were fought to force China to accept British drug trafficking. China banned opium to stop addiction epidemics. Britain responded by declaring war twice. British forces bombarded Chinese cities until China agreed to legalize opium and cede Hong Kong. Britain waged war to keep selling drugs. They won. Number 10. By 1880, opium accounted for 15% of British India's revenue. The East India Company grew opium in India, smuggled it to China, and used the profits to fund colonial administration. Millions of Chinese became addicted. Britain got rich. The Qing dynasty collapsed, partly due to the opium crisis Britain created and enforced at gunpoint. Number 11. The British Crown took direct control of India in 1858, after the East India Company's rule became too brutal even for Victorian standards. The Indian Rebellion of 1857 saw mass uprisings, brutal reprisals, and atrocities on both sides. The solution? The British government took over and continued the exploitation under the Crown. Number 12. Queen Victoria became Empress of India in 1876. While millions of Indians starved in a famine, the British worsened through policy. The Great Famine of 1876 to 1878 killed up to 10 million people. Britain exported grain from India during the famine to maintain profits. People starved while food left the country. That's not natural disaster, that's policy. Number 13. The Bengal famine of 1943 killed 3 million people, and Winston Churchill made it worse. Britain diverted food to stockpiles for British soldiers and Greek civilians, while Bengalis starved. Churchill said the famine was Indians' fault for breeding like rabbits. When officials begged for relief, he asked why Gandhi hadn't died yet. The man celebrated for defeating Hitler starved millions. Number 14. British created famines in India killed between 12 and 29 million people over 40 years during the late 1800s. Policies prioritised exports over feeding locals, dismantled traditional irrigation, and imposed taxes during droughts. The famines weren't accidents, they were economic decisions with body counts. Number 15. Britain extracted $45 trillion from India between 1765 and 1938, according to economic research. India's share of the global economy dropped from 23% in 1700 to under 4% by 1950. Britain didn't develop India, it drained it. The wealth that built Britain came from impoverishing India. Number 16. The British invented concentration camps during the Boer War in South Africa. To defeat Boer guerrillas, Britain rounded up civilians, including women and children, into camps where 28,000 Boers and 20,000 black Africans died from disease, starvation, and neglect. The camps were so brutal they shocked the world. Britain called them refugee camps. Number 17. Britain used scorched earth tactics in the Boer War, burning 30,000 farms and destroying food supplies to starve the Boers into surrender. Civilians were left with nothing. The strategy worked. The Boers surrendered. Britain won by making survival impossible. Number 18. The British Empire fought 72 wars between 1803 and 1901 to expand and maintain its territory. That's almost one war per year. Most were small, brutal conflicts against populations with inferior weapons. The empire was built through relentless violence, not diplomacy. Number 19. The Maxim gun gave Britain a technological genocide advantage. Invented in 1884, it was the first fully automatic machine gun. At the Battle of Omdurman in Sudan, 1898, British forces armed with Maxims killed 10,000 Sudanese warriors in 5 hours while losing only 47 men. Superior firepower enabled mass slaughter. Number 20. Britain used chemical weapons in Iraq in the 1922. When Iraqis rebelled against British rule, Winston Churchill authorised RAF planes to drop poison gas on villages. He wrote, "I am strongly in favour of using poisoned gas against uncivilized tribes." The attacks terrorised civilians into submission. Britain pioneered airborne chemical warfare. Number 20. 1. The Amritsar massacre of 1919 saw British troops fire on unarmed Indian civilians, killing at least 379 and wounding over 1,200. General Reginald Dyer ordered soldiers to shoot into a trapped crowd at Jallianwala Bagh for 10 minutes without warning. He later said he would have used machine guns if he could fit them through the entrance. He was never prosecuted. Number 22. Dyer was celebrated as a hero in Britain. The British public raised £26,000 for him, worth millions today. The House of Lords praised his actions. He received a sword inscribed Saviour of the Punjab. Massacre became heroism when the victims weren't white. Number 23. Britain carved up Africa at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, without a single African representative present. European powers drew borders with rulers, dividing 10,000 ethnic and political groups across 50 new countries. Rival groups were forced together, related groups were split apart. The borders were designed for European convenience, not African realities. Most African conflicts today stem from those lines. Number 24. King Leopold II of Belgium committed genocide in the Congo, but Britain enabled it. Britain recognized Leopold's claim to the Congo, despite reports of atrocities, mass killings, mutilations, and forced labor that killed 10 million people. Why? Leopold's Congo didn't threaten British interests. Genocide was acceptable if it didn't interfere with profits. Number 25. Britain controlled Egypt without officially colonizing it. After crushing Egyptian nationalists in 1882, Britain occupied Egypt while pretending it was still independent. They controlled the Suez Canal, extracted wealth, and ruled through puppet governments for 70 years. Colonialism without the paperwork. Number 26. The Suez Canal was Britain's lifeline to India and the key to imperial logistics. When Egypt's leader Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the canal in 1956, Britain, France and Israel invaded. The US and Soviet Union both condemned the invasion. Britain was forced to withdraw. It was the end of British superpower status. One canal exposed the empire's collapse. Number 27. Britain promised the same land to 3 different groups during World War I. The Balfour Declaration promised Palestine to Jews. The McMahon-Hussein Correspondence promised it to Arabs. The Sykes-Picot Agreement gave it to Britain and France. All 3 contradicted each other. Britain lied to everyone. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the result. Number 28. Britain invented aerial policing in Iraq, bombing villages from planes to crush rebellions cheaply. In the 1,920 seconds, the RAF bombed Iraqi tribes who refused British rule. It was cost-effective compared to ground troops. Churchill called it a scientific method. Civilians called it terror. Britain pioneered modern air warfare against insurgents. Number 29. The partition of India in 1947 killed over 1 million people. Britain announced independence with only 73 days to draw borders dividing India and Pakistan. Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who'd never been to India, drew the borders in 5 weeks using outdated maps. The lines split Punjab and Bengal, igniting religious violence. 15 million people were displaced. Britain left chaos. Number 30. Britain deliberately accelerated the partition timeline to avoid responsibility for the violence. Lord Mountbatten, the last viceroy, moved independence from June 1948 to August 1947, so British troops could leave before the massacres started. Britain didn't want to deal with the consequences of its own borders. Millions died in the rush. Number 31. The British Empire wasn't just white. Indians, Africans and Caribbeans fought for Britain in both world wars. 2.5 million Indian soldiers served in World War II alone. They fought fascism in Europe while being denied freedom at home. Britain promised independence in exchange for military support. The promise was delayed for decades. Number 32. Indian soldiers were segregated, underpaid and used as cannon fodder. They received lower pay than white soldiers, were assigned the most dangerous missions and were blamed when operations failed. Over 87,000 Indian soldiers died in WWI. Britain built monuments to honour them, in India, not London. Number 33. The Bengal famine of 1943 happened partly because Britain diverted food to feed soldiers fighting in Europe and the Mediterranean. Churchill prioritised military stockpiles over feeding Indians. When India's viceroy warned of mass starvation, Churchill dismissed it. Indians died to ensure British and Allied troops stayed fed. Number 34. Britain tested nuclear weapons in Australia on Aboriginal land without consent or warning. Between 1952 and 1963, Britain conducted 12 nuclear tests at Maralinga and Mu Field, exposing indigenous Australians to radiation. Thousands were displaced. Many developed cancers. Britain denied responsibility for decades. Compensation came only after lawsuits. Number 35. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya, 1952 to 1960, saw Britain commit atrocities on a massive scale. Torture, castration, mass detention and executions were routine. At least 100,000 Kenyans were detained in camps and 20,000 were killed. British forces burned villages and used collective punishment. In 2013, Britain admitted to torture and paid £20 million to 5,000 survivors. It took 60 years. Number 36. British colonial authorities destroyed records of atrocities before decolonisation. In the 1960 seconds, officials burned, shredded or dumped documents into the ocean to hide evidence of torture, massacres and war crimes. Thousands of files were destroyed. Some were discovered in 2011 inches, a secret government archive. Britain hid its crimes. Number 37. Britain used detention without trial across the empire. In Kenya, Malaya, Cyprus and Palestine, British forces rounded up suspects and imprisoned them indefinitely without charges. Torture during interrogation was common. The European Convention on Human Rights didn't apply in colonies. Rights were for Europeans, not colonial subjects. Number 38. The Malayan Emergency, 1948 to 1960, saw Britain fight communist insurgents using brutal counterinsurgency tactics. Villages suspected of supporting rebels were burned. Entire populations were forcibly relocated to new villages, prison camps disguised as resettlement. Over 500,000 people were detained. Britain won by making resistance impossible. Number 39. Britain invented the term terrorism to delegitimize independence movements. Irish Republicans, Indian nationalists, Kenyan Mau Mau and Cypriot EOKA fighters were all labelled terrorists by the British press and government. Freedom fighters became criminals. Language shaped perception. One side's rebel is another's terrorist. Number 40. The Irish fought British rule for 800 years. From medieval conquest to the 1916 Easter Rising to the Troubles, 1968 to 1998. Ireland resisted longer than any colony. Britain partitioned Ireland in 1921, creating Northern Ireland to maintain control. The partition sowed sectarian conflict that killed 3,500 people over 30 years. The violence ended in 1998. The division remains. Number 41. The British Army killed 14 unarmed civilians on Bloody Sunday in Northern Ireland, 1972. Soldiers opened fire on a civil rights march in Derry, shooting protesters in the back as they fled. The British government covered it up for 38 years. In 2010, an inquiry confirmed the victims were innocent. One soldier faced trial in 2021. He was acquitted. Number 42. Britain crushed the 1,857 Indian Rebellion with extreme brutality. Captured rebels were tied to cannons and blown apart, a method called blowing from a gun. Villages suspected of supporting the rebellion were razed. Mass hangings were public spectacles. The British press called it restoring order. It was state terror. Number 43. After the rebellion, Britain exiled the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, to Burma, where he died in poverty. The Mughal Empire, which had ruled India for over 300 years, was officially ended. Britain erased India's monarchy and imposed direct rule. The symbolic humiliation was deliberate. Number 44. Britain looted India's wealth systematically. The Koh-i-Noor diamond, taken from the Sikh Empire in 1849, now sits in the British Crown Jewels. India, Pakistan and Afghanistan all claim ownership. Britain refuses to return it. The empire's treasures remain in British museums, legally acquired through conquest. Number 45. The British Museum holds artifacts looted from across the empire: Egyptian mummies, Greek sculptures, Benin bronzes, Ethiopian manuscripts. Over 8 million objects were acquired through colonialism. Britain claims legal ownership. Former colonies demand their return. The debate continues. The loot stays in London. Number 46. Britain used famine as a weapon. During the Irish famine, 1845 to 1852, Britain continued exporting food from Ireland while 1 million people starved to death and another million emigrated. Landlords evicted starving tenants. Workhouses became death traps. Britain called it a natural disaster. The Irish called it genocide. Number 47. The British government's response to the Irish famine was rooted in ideology. Officials believed providing relief would encourage dependency and interfere with free markets. They prioritized economic theory over human lives. People starved while grain ships sailed from Irish ports to England. Policy killed more than blight. Number 48. Britain transported 162,000 convicts to Australia between 1788 and 1868. Crimes included stealing bread, poaching, and political dissent. Many were Irish political prisoners. The journey killed 1 inch 10. Survivors became forced labour building the colony. Australia was a prison before it was a nation. Number 49. British colonisation of Australia was genocide against Aboriginal peoples. Massacres, poisonings, and deliberate disease spread killed tens of thousands. The Tasmanian Aboriginal population dropped from 5,000 to 300 in 70 years. In 2008, Australia officially apologised for the stolen generations. Aboriginal children forcibly removed from families to civilise them. Britain never apologised. Number 50. The stolen generations policy lasted until 1970. Over 100,000 Aboriginal children were taken from their families and placed with white families or institutions to erase Indigenous culture. Many were abused. Some were used as forced labour. The trauma echoes through generations. Cultural genocide has long-term effects. Number 51. Britain colonised New Zealand through the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, promising Maori sovereignty while seizing land. The English and Maori versions of the treaty differed. Maori believed they retained authority. Britain believed they'd ceded sovereignty. Land confiscations followed. Wars erupted. By 1900, Maori controlled only 10% of New Zealand. The treaty remains disputed. Number 52. Britain fought the Maori Wars, 1845 to 1872. Using scorched earth tactics. Villages and crops were destroyed. Maori land was confiscated as punishment for rebellion. Maori leaders were imprisoned or executed. The wars ended when resistance became unsustainable. Britain called it pacification. It was conquest. Number 53. Britain created the Dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa as semi-independent white settler colonies, with self-governance denied to non-white colonies. White colonists got democracy. Brown and black subjects got subjugation. Race determined rights. The empire was a hierarchy built on skin colour. Number 54. Canada's Indigenous peoples were subjected to cultural genocide through residential schools. From 1863 to 1996, over 150,000 Indigenous children were forcibly removed from families and sent to schools run by churches and funded by the government. Thousands died from disease, abuse and neglect. Mass graves are still being discovered. Britain established the system. Canada continued it. Number 55. South Africa's apartheid system had British colonial roots. Britain conquered the region, dispossessed black Africans of land, and established racial hierarchies. When the National Party formalised apartheid in 1948, they built on British precedents. Segregation, pass laws, and forced removals all had colonial origins. Apartheid was colonialism rebranded. Number 56. Britain supported apartheid South Africa economically and militarily until the 1982. Despite international condemnation, Britain traded with the regime, sold weapons, and shielded South Africa from sanctions. Margaret Thatcher called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. Britain profited from apartheid until global pressure forced change. Number 57. The scramble for Africa saw Britain seize 30% of the continent in 20 years, 1880 to 1900. Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, South Africa, Britain conquered or colonized them all. The goal was resources: gold, diamonds, rubber, palm oil. Extraction, not development, was the strategy. Number 58. Cecil Rhodes, the British imperialist, dreamed of a railroad from Cape Town to Cairo, all on British territory. His British South Africa Company conquered Zimbabwe, then Rhodesia named after him. He founded the De Beers diamond monopoly and exploited African labour. He died one of the richest men in the world. His fortune came from African land and labour he stole. Number 59. The Rhodes Scholarship, one of the world's most prestigious awards, is funded by wealth extracted from African colonialism. Rhodes's will established the scholarship to create leaders committed to British imperial ideals. Recipients included Bill Clinton and numerous world leaders. The scholarship exists because of exploitation, legacy laundering at its finest. Number 60. Britain used divide and rule tactics to maintain control. In India, Britain favoured Muslims over Hindus in some regions, Hindus over Muslims in others. In Nigeria, Britain empowered northern groups over southern ones. In Rwanda, Britain favoured Tutsis over Hutus. Ethnic tensions were manufactured to prevent unified resistance. Many of today's conflicts have colonial roots. Number 61. The British Empire spread English as a global language through force, not choice. Colonial subjects were required to learn English to access jobs, education, and legal systems. Indigenous languages were suppressed. Speaking native languages in schools was punished. English became dominant through coercion. Linguistic imperialism was policy. Number 62. British colonialism destroyed native industries to create captive markets. India's textile industry, once the world's largest, was deliberately dismantled. Britain taxed Indian cloth, banned exports, and flooded India with British textiles. Weavers starved. By 1900, India imported British cloth instead of exporting its own. Britain destroyed competitors, not developed partners. Number 63. The British Empire ran on racial pseudoscience. Phrenology, social Darwinism, and eugenics proved white superiority and justified colonialism. Scientists measured skulls to demonstrate Europeans were more intelligent. Textbooks taught that darker races were inferior and needed civilizing. Racism wasn't a side effect of empire, it was the foundation. Number 64. Britain used local elites to rule indirectly, co-opting indigenous leaders to enforce colonial rule. Maharajas in India, chiefs in Africa, sultans in Malaya, all were paid to suppress their own people. Collaboration was rewarded, resistance was punished, the system was efficient. It also created lasting divisions within colonized societies. Number 65. Christian missionaries were tools of empire. They built schools and hospitals, but also spread British culture, suppressed indigenous religions, and prepared populations for colonial rule. Conversion often preceded conquest. Missionaries didn't just save souls, they facilitated subjugation. Number 66. Britain introduced cricket, tea and railways to colonies, but not as gifts. Cricket taught discipline and British values. Tea plantations exploited labour. Railways moved resources to ports for export, not for local benefit. Infrastructure served extraction, not development. The benefits were incidental. Number 67. British railways in India were designed to move resources, not people. Trains carried cotton, coal and grain to ports for export to Britain. Passenger services were secondary. India paid for the railways through taxes, then paid Britain to operate them. India financed its own exploitation. Number 68. Britain fought the Opium Wars because Chinese tea was too expensive. Britain was addicted to tea but had nothing China wanted to buy. Solution? Force China to accept opium as payment, creating a captive market of addicts. When China resisted, Britain declared war. Tea addiction fueled imperialism. Number 69. The British Empire ran the largest drug cartel in history. At its peak, British India produced 2,000 tons of opium annually for export to China. Millions became addicted. The Qing government collapsed partly due to the social chaos addiction caused. Britain called it trade. It was state-sponsored drug trafficking. Number 70. Britain used colonial soldiers to fight its wars. In WWI, over 1.5 million Indians served. In World War II, over 2.5 million. They fought in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Over 150,000 died. They were promised independence. Instead, they got delayed promises and partition. Their sacrifice was exploited. Number 71. Colonial soldiers were rarely commemorated in Britain. The memorials are in India, Kenya and the Caribbean, not London. Britain honoured its own dead but forgot those who died for the empire. Memory is selective. Gratitude was conditional. Number 72. The Jallianwala Bagh Memorial in India has a well where people jumped to escape British bullets during the Amritsar massacre. The well was later found to contain 120 bodies, men, women and children, who drowned trying to escape. Britain never built a memorial. India did. Britain's monuments celebrate empire. India's remember its victims. Number 73. Britain's first colonial rebellion succeeded in America. The 13 colonies declared independence in 1776, fought Britain for 8 years and won. Britain lost America, but learned lessons. Future empires were ruled more carefully. The loss of America made Britain more ruthless elsewhere. Number 74. Britain fought 2 wars in Afghanistan. 1,839 to 1,000, 842 and 1,000, 878 to 1,880, and lost both. The First Anglo-Afghan War ended with 16,500 British troops retreating from Kabul. Only one man survived the journey. Afghanistan was called the graveyard of empires even then. Britain learned nothing. NATO repeated the mistake 160 years later. Number 75. The British Empire collapsed faster than it was built. In 1945, Britain ruled a quarter of the world. By 1970, most colonies were independent. Decolonisation happened in 25 years. Economic exhaustion from World War II, anti-colonial movements, and American pressure ended the empire. Britain didn't give independence, it was forced to. Number 76. The Suez Crisis of 1956 exposed Britain's decline. When Egypt nationalised the Suez Canal, Britain invaded without US approval. America threatened economic sanctions. Britain withdrew in humiliation. The message was clear. Britain was no longer a superpower. The empire's days were over. Number 77. Britain clung to colonies longer than it should have. Cyprus, Kenya, Malaya and Aden all fought independence wars in the 1,950 seconds, 60 seconds. Britain used torture, detention and scorched earth tactics to hold on. Eventually, economics and violence forced retreat. Britain left when staying cost too much, not when it was morally right. Number 78. The Commonwealth was Britain's consolation prize. Former colonies were invited to join a voluntary association with the British monarch as symbolic head. Most joined for economic ties. The Commonwealth maintains British influence without formal control. Empire rebranded as partnership. The structure changed. The power dynamics didn't. Number 79. Britain returned Hong Kong to China in 1997, but only because the 99-year lease expired. Britain didn't voluntarily give it back. The treaty forced their hand. Even then, Britain tried to impose democratic reforms on Hong Kong just before leaving, reforms they'd never implemented in 150 years of rule. Hypocrisy to the end. Number 80. The Chagos Islands remain Britain's last colony in the Indian Ocean. In the 1960 seconds, Britain forcibly expelled 1,500 Chagosians to make way for a US military base on Diego Garcia. Families were removed, pets were gassed, homes were destroyed. The Chagosians have been fighting for the right to return for 50 years. Britain refuses. Number 81. The Falklands War of 1982 was Britain's last imperial conflict. When Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, Margaret Thatcher sent a naval task force 8,000 miles to reclaim them. 900 people died. Britain won. The islands, population 3,000, remained British. Empire's final stand was over a remote archipelago most Britons couldn't locate on a map. Number 82. Britain still has 14 overseas territories, remnants of empire. Bermuda, the Cayman Islands, Gibraltar, the British Virgin Islands, all remain under British sovereignty. Why? Tax havens. These tiny territories host trillions in offshore wealth. Empire's last function: hiding money. Number 83. The City of London became the world's financial centre because of empire. Wealth extracted from colonies was invested in London banks. Imperial trade routes created global financial networks. When the empire ended, the finance remained. London's dominance in banking, insurance and law is empire's most enduring legacy. Number 84. Britain's wealth gap is a colonial legacy. Aristocratic families enriched by slavery, land confiscation and colonial monopolies remain Britain's richest. The descendants of enslaved people and colonized subjects remain among the poorest. Inequality isn't accidental, it's inherited. Number 85. Britain has never paid reparations for slavery or colonialism. Caribbean nations, India and African countries have demanded compensation for centuries of exploitation. Britain refuses, claiming the past is the past. Yet Britain paid slaveholders for their loss when slavery ended. Justice was never for the victims. Number 86. The British education system barely teaches colonial atrocities. Millions of British students learn about the empire's achievements, railways, democracy, the rule of law, without learning about the famines, massacres and wealth extraction. Textbooks sanitize history. National myth trumps truth. Number 87. In 2016, a British poll found 43% of Britons believed the empire was a good thing. Only 19% said it was bad. 25% said neither. Pride in empire persists despite the evidence. Nostalgia for power outweighs acknowledgement of harm. The myth endures. Number 88. Brexit was fueled partly by imperial nostalgia. Take back control, echoed empire-era slogans. Supporters believed Britain could thrive independently, as it once did. The delusion that Britain could dominate alone ignored that empire was built on exploitation, not exceptionalism. History was misremembered as inspiration. Number 89. The British Empire created modern borders that still cause conflicts. India, Pakistan, Israel, Palestine, Sudan, South Sudan, Cyprus, Iraq, Nigeria, all have borders drawn by British officials with no regard for ethnic, religious or cultural realities. Lines on maps became permanent divisions, conflicts endure. Number 90. Kashmir remains divided because of British partition. Britain promised independence to both India and Pakistan, then split Kashmir. 3 wars and 70 years later, the region remains disputed. Millions live under military occupation. Britain drew the line. South Asia still bleeds. Number 91. The British Empire introduced the rule of law, but only for Europeans. Colonial courts applied different laws to white settlers and non-white subjects. Justice was tiered by race. Legal systems built to protect colonizers, not the colonized. The rule of law was the rule of some. Number 92. Britain left behind Westminster-style democracies in former colonies, but democracy was denied during colonial rule. India, the world's largest democracy, was ruled by an unelected viceroy for 200 years. Democracy was for Britain, not for the colonized. Freedom was granted only when empire ended. Number 93. The British Empire spread capitalism globally, but through coercion, not choice. Free markets were imposed. Tariffs protected British goods while colonial products were taxed. Free trade meant freedom for Britain to dominate markets. Economic imperialism outlasted political empire. Number 94. Britain extracted resources, but left infrastructure that benefited extraction, not locals. Ports faced Britain, not neighbouring countries. Railways led to mines, not markets. Roads connected colonies to coasts for export. Development served empire. Independence inherited infrastructure designed for exploitation. Number 95. English common law spread through empire and remains the legal foundation in 53 countries. Laws written in London still govern billions. Legal systems designed for colonial control became permanent structures. Britain's legal imperialism outlived political control. Number 96. The British Empire's cultural impact is inescapable. English is spoken by 1.5 billion people. Cricket is played across the Commonwealth. Tea is Britain's national drink, imported from colonies. Fish and chips use fish from imperial trade routes. British culture is global because empire made it so. Number 97. Britain's museums are filled with empire's loot, and they won't give it back. The Parthenon marbles, Benin bronzes, Rosetta Stone, Koh-i-Noor diamond, all were taken during conquest. Former colonies demand return. Britain claims legal ownership. The stolen past remains on display. Number 98. The British Empire killed more people than Nazi Germany, but it's not taught that way. Famines in India, massacres in Kenya, genocide in Australia, slavery in the Caribbean. The body count exceeds 100 million over 400 years. Nazi atrocities happened in 12 years. British atrocities happened over centuries. Time doesn't erase guilt. Number 99. Britain has apologised for some colonial atrocities, but never paid reparations. Apologies for the Amritsar massacre, Mau Mau torture, and the Irish famine came decades late and carried no compensation. Words without action. Acknowledgement without accountability. Number 100. The British Empire's legacy is the modern world. Global inequality, north-south wealth gaps, resource extraction, tax havens, border conflicts, linguistic dominance, legal systems and financial networks, all trace back to empire. The structures built to control colonies still shape global power. Empire ended, its systems didn't. Number 101. The sun finally set on the British Empire, but its shadow remains. Every famine, every partition, every conflict born from colonial borders, every stolen artifact in a British museum, every offshore account in the Cayman Islands, every racial inequality rooted in imperial hierarchies, these are empire's inheritance. Britain built the largest empire in history through violence and extraction. The world it created is still unequal, still divided, still bleeding from wounds Britain refuses to acknowledge. You can't understand the modern world without understanding the British Empire. And you can't understand the British Empire without confronting what it really was. Not a force for civilization, but the most successful system of organized theft in human history. That's the empire they don't teach in schools. That's the truth textbooks omit. And now you know.